In this lesson, we'll talk about file input and output. So the goal will be for you to be able to read from and write to files by the end of this lesson. There will be some activities that you can try at the end. A lot of them relate specifically to string methods, using those string methods within the context of file reading and writing. Other than the opening and closing and making sure you have the correct arguments, the file writing really relates to how to use the other structures within the context of saving and storing information externally. So to brainstorm, you want to think of how we've been making data permanent. And up to this point, really permanent means memory location within the context of running a particular program. But there are really other ways to make data more permanent, because right now when we create programs, as soon as we close those, the data we've created is lost. If you think about objects we've been creating or just variables that we've created, they're gone. So the state of the program always begins kind of empty. And that's not really the case that we have in the real world. If you think of any apps or programs, there's always some sort of information database that we draw upon to run the program, or to at least have data there that we can access. And so we want to be able to kind of pick up where we left off in most instances. And in order to do that, we have to have a way to store information outside of our program. And we can do that using files. What we'll use today are basic text files. You can obviously create files with different extensions and format them so that they can be read by other types of programs. For instance, comma-separated values, or a .csv file that can be read by Excel to create graphs. Well, we could create a text file and give it that extension, and we would be able to use that and interpret it in other programs. So in order to be able to operate with files, we need to be able to open them first. And this is different from what you're actually doing with them. This is simply just opening. The first argument gives the name of the file, and it's usually the file path. Second argument defines what you want to do with the file, and we'll get to that in a moment. So open, what this does, this open call returns an object or a file handle for this particular file that's opened, and that's what we'll use then to do things like read and write and append information. So if we say, for instance, with the second argument, we can provide either an R, a W, or an A, and that means either read, write, or append. The R is the default option, so if nothing is included, we'll assume that you're reading from a file. The write and the append are only if you want to change information. Now, it's really important here. Typically, what we'll be doing is if you're opening a brand new file, you will write to it, because if you choose the write option with an existing file, that data will be overwritten. So the append, or the A argument, is the one to use if you want to tack on information to the end of a file that already has information there. So if you're thinking about a database and you're storing information for users, the append option is what you'll use to make sure you don't erase previous data. So let's go ahead then and open this up. There's a paragraph.txt file that I'll include near this post. What you want to do is include that to the directory that you're also going to be creating a Python file in. So you create a new Python script in that directory, and you'll call, in this case, I've just called mine Unit 4 Lesson 2 Action. So if I open up this folder, you'll see here I've got this paragraph.txt file. Now, my file is called actually just action unfinished, and if we open that up in PyScripter, we can see that this action unfinished, this just got the header comment, and all I've done here is I've opened up paragraph.txt. So the file path, because this is in the same location as the Python file, it's simply just paragraph.txt. It's in the current folder, and I'm going to open this for reading. So this paragraph.txt file has, of course, some text in it that I'm going to read. If I open up what that looks like using a text editor, it's just a paragraph of information. So that's the file handle, my file. And now what I can do is I can take this file handle and I can do some things with it. So I've already opened it up for reading. Now let's see what we can do. Well, reading data from a file, there are a few options that we have. We can read by byte, we can read the whole file, or we can read it line by line. So the read method will read the whole file into a string, and it will take and return that file as a single string. Now to do that, we would use the file handle that we created, in this case input file, and use the .read extension to put that into a string called entire file. Now we could also specify the number of bytes we'd like to read. More often than not, in case everything you're going to do here in the course, you won't need to do that. But what we will use actually is this read line function. And this is probably the one that you'll use most often. So this is reading a single line from the file. So we'll see what happens here. If I open up my paragraph.txt, I've got this file handle called myFile. And if I use myFile.readline, I'm going to print that to the screen, whatever I have. And so when I run this, let's see, I must have made a small mistake here. I think I used a capital L in readline as opposed to a small l. Let's make sure I change that. That's the problem. There we go. Readline, all lowercase. There we go. And now we run this. What I can see here is the first line from the file being read. Now this is the first line because it's recognized the new line character at the end. And so I only get the first line. That's how the read line function works. It recognizes that new line character, or if someone's hit enter in the file. Now notice what happens if you try to read another line from the file. So let's just take this statement and include it a second time. It's interesting to see what happens here because in fact you've kind of got a current position in the file that's being remembered here by the file handle. Because when you print it a second time, the readline command generates the second line of the file. So it has remembered that it had kind of finished off at the end of the first line. And now when you call readline again, you can think of it as that cursor location has then recognized the next line at that point. So the readline option keeps a working memory of where exactly in the file it's currently sitting. Now the other thing here is, of course, if we tried reading the whole file, we could do the same thing. And instead of calling the readline command, we could simply call read. So the option is, if we have the entire file that we'd like to read, we can read the whole thing at once, get rid of the extra bracket, and run this. And now I would expect to see the whole file. And that's what I have here. So reading, very important to remember that the read line in the file. So then obviously the second component here is writing data to a file. So if you read data, you only have a certain amount of tools to use, obviously. You can take the data and store it within your program, manipulate it, but ultimately the point here is to be able to then print back to the file and to save or to update information to save that. So in order for us to write data to a file, we have to open that file using a different argument, so either the write or append mode. Now, if we want to open up a file that doesn't exist, we can actually do that pretty easily by simply just creating it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to open up a new file. I don't have at this moment, now let me check actually, let's see what's here. Okay, I've got this file called test file. I'm going to delete that. And okay, we'll just create a new one. What I will do is I will open up, I'll call this new file. And what you can do if you want to open up a new file is you can include the whole file path. In this case, I have to include it not just from the current folder, but you include the name at the end then of what the file is you would like to open. And if this file doesn't exist, it will create it for you. So I could actually run this and open up the test file that I have, or if I wanted, I could create a new test file and give it a different name. And when I run this, notice at this moment that there is no file called new test file. But if I run the program and I look over to my folder, now I'll see that this new test file text document is here. So this open option, if you don't have a file that exists, it will open it for you. You just have to make sure, of course, you specify the correct file path. Now the R in front of this string means I want Python to interpret this as a raw string. And you'll notice that, of course, when you're specifying a file paths, you have slashes, quotations, all sorts of types of characters that might be special characters. And here I just want to interpret it as a raw string. So that's what the R in front denotes. So I've opened up my new file. Notice here I've opened it up for writing. So I've created this new file. There shouldn't be anything in it right now. If I go to that file, the new test file, when I open it up, it's of course blank. It's just been created. Now I can go ahead and write something to it. So in order to write something, I can use the .write command, and I have to pass it a string. And of course, I have to use the file handle. So mine's called new file, and that's what I'll do is I'll use that new file. So we've created this text document. We've opened it for writing. And let's just write the first line from the paragraph.txt file. We'll also add a line of our own. So what we'll do is we'll go here and we'll take the first line of my file, and rather than printing it to the screen, we'll take that and we will write this. So I'll call this first line, and what I'll do is I'll write the first line to my new file. So I have to take the new file handle dot write, and what I would like to write is the first line from my old file. So let's just change this, maybe old file and new file here. And then the first line will be the line from the old file, and I'll write that to the new file. I will also then write, and remember here the argument is a string, so I'll want to include a new line, so I have to include the new line character, and then this is my new line. So I'll write that as well. So we run the program, and I should see my file being updated here. New test file should have that new information in it. Okay, now let's make sure I specify the right handles. Okay, so we don't see it there yet, and the question is, why hasn't this updated for us? So we can write things, but the important part that we have to not forget about, and you can see that I just forgot about it there, is to make sure we close the file before we actually try to open it and see what's there. So at the end of all of the processing that you're doing, you want to make sure that you close the files that you've been working with. So here, old file, old file. We'll close the old file and we'll close the new file. And now when I include those two statements, it will allow me to access the updated versions that I have. So I have this new test file. Now I can see everything's been written to it. Now I have here, this is my new line, and what I forgot to change was that I actually wrote the whole original file to the new one. So the option that I have here, I didn't change it back to read line, but if I wanted to simply include the first line of paragraph.txt, then I would have to include simply the read line command. So now when I write this, I'll open it, write the first line, and then close it. There we go. So can you read this? Only smart people can. I couldn't believe that. And then there's my new line at the end. So you'll notice what happened here. I used the write command. So the new test file was wiped clean. That paragraph that was there before was removed and it started fresh. So remember, if you want to keep the text that's already there, you'd have to change this option to an append option. And now if I do the same thing again, I should see what was there in the past, and now I should see duplicate version of the text that was originally there because it has kept it. So there you can see that I've got two copies of the same thing because I've appended to what was previously in the file. So closing files is very important. Make sure you always close the file. Specifically, the file that you're writing to, if you want to see the updates being made, you'll have to close that, but it's good form to also close the file that you've been reading from as well, in the case here where we read from a file and wrote to a new one. So now we ask ourselves, well, what can we do to efficiently process the file? And one of the ways to do that is to actually loop through lines in a file using that new line option, or the read line option. There's actually an efficient way to do that, however, in Python, and it goes with how Python recognizes this file handle. So if we open a file and we give it this name, my file, we can actually use this as a structure in a for loop to loop through the lines in the file. So we don't need to actually explicitly say read line every time. We could if we wanted to, but we can actually use this notation here as well, where I take every line in the file and do something to it. So as opposed to needing this read line command, if I wanted, what I could do here is after I've opened up my file, I could take a for loop, and I've called my original file